Hey guys, hey people who might be watching this. My name's Shayne Hunter. I was an anarchist activist for about 4 years, and I believed that anarchism was the answer to a lot of the problems in our political system, and that was the most meaningful form of activities that I could engage in to make a better life. Since then, I've reconsidered my points of view. I have serious concerns about anarchism as a solution. One, its claims to certainty is something that I worry about. The way that ideologies can trigger our tribal sense of identity that can lead us to dehumanize others is something I can have concerns about. And the other issue I have concerns about is the possibility for anarchism and all ideologies to scapegoat. And then I was thinking that maybe I could have a chat with Brenton, who still has anarchist beliefs, and he could maybe respond to some of those things as we delve into it more from his point of view. And I also like to say from the get-go that obviously I don't believe that I have all the answers, and I'm sure Brenton doesn't think either, and that I would like this conversation to be not fueling antagonism and frustration and hatred and miscommunication, but be some form of authentic dialogue about these issues, and it can hopefully be entertaining and stimulating for anyone of any point of view.
Hi, folks. Yeah, my name is Brenton Lengel. I am an author, a playwright. Most recently, I wrote Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, which has been published through Scout Comics, and we just finished a successful Kickstarter to fund the second issue. And yeah, I'm an anarchist. And some years ago, I met Darren like anarchist boards, and we we spent some time collaborating, and then he kind of had a falling out, so it's great to be talking with him again. So yeah, I am to contrast Darren, I am still an anarchist. I do think I have all of the answers, and in fact my mind is flawless and knows everything. I'm kidding.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a stimulating discussion. With me and anarchism, I became an anarchist around 2010, 2011, right before I got involved in Occupy, and I've gone through various phases where I have been more or less radical, but more or less my idea that anarchism, at least to me, is the ideology that I am most interested in at the moment. Like that's somewhat remained constant, though I keep getting less radical. I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'm wrong about this whole anarchy thing, and then something happens and I'm like, oh god, no, I was right. I've actually said frequently online, I hate being constantly proven right about this whole anarchy thing. So yeah, we can kind of talk about that, about ideologies. Yeah, I'm excited to have a fruitful, positive discussion.
Great. There's so much to talk about. It's kind of hard to know where to begin. And I was thinking that this could be a bit more of a free-flowing discussion than a formalized debate. And perhaps if this project or this particular episode we're engaged in, if it is fun and fruitful, perhaps we can in the future do something that's a bit more narrowly focused.
Sure, sounds like fun.
Cheers. At the beginning of the call, I mentioned sort of three areas in which I'm maybe critical of anarchism, but maybe not just specifically anarchism, maybe ideologies of all varieties. And so one of them was the claims to certainty. The other was the possibility of tribalism, invoking an in-group and an out-group, those who are the anarchists and those who are the unbelievers, or people who are maybe ideological opponents. I have concerns about how ideology or anarchism could fuel that. And then the other one was scapegoating. So maybe I could elaborate on one of them and we could discuss one of them. Which point out of those three would you like to discuss first?
Let's talk about the first one first, because why don't you go a little bit more into that, and then I'll respond. Because you're saying it, and I've got several things I want to say about all three of those, but I don't want to get ahead of myself, and so let's focus. So I think the first thing you talked about was specifically about ideologies.
Certainty.
Is that correct?
So,
Certainty,
yeah,
claims of certainty.
yeah,
All right. So
yeah.
so why do you feel? This is actually I'm very curious about this. So why do you feel anarchism makes claims of certainty?
I feel it makes claims of certainty because it claims to understand sociological, political, and economic realities with enough authority and understanding in which anarchists feel confident in their ability to reconfigure these things for a more socially ideal outcome. And I would suggest that all three of those abstractions and the ways that those abstractions might blend into other fields like psychology or even biology or ecology and all these other abstractions, that altering these things may have very unforeseen consequences. So to elaborate, one thing that I find very suspicious with the claims that anarchists put forward about how they think that their ideology could solve some of the political or maybe even existential issues facing humanity is consider, for example, someone who studies medicine. So they have to go through an incredibly rigorous amount of education and training based on hundreds of years of a institution that uses a certain methodology of empiricism and science and peer reviewing in order to have the robust sense of knowledge claims that they can go about treating people medically in a way that's safe and ethical and actually works. While someone who maybe is an ideologue, whether it be an anarchist or, for that matter, a communist or a Nazi or some other strain of political ideology, that they don't have the same levels of discipline. So one, anarchists aren't actually using a scientific methodology because, you know, it is so hard to use science to prove things that are so complicated as grand political abstractions. And then secondly, I find it suspicious that you can kind of learn anarchism in maybe a few weeks or a few months and then feel qualified going out into the world and advocating radical social changes that might have drastically unforeseen consequences. And so I would say that I'm skeptical of the knowledge claims that anarchists have when other people in other fields, like even being a plumber, requires a more rigorous learning curve before you go about trying to fix things.
Okay, so I'm hearing you there, and I don't 100% disagree with what you're saying, but I'd like you to be a little more specific here. What anarchist thinkers are saying what you're saying? Like, where does Bakunin go in and say, oh, by the way, you don't have to learn anything about politics to go and be an anarchist and tell everybody how to do things? Where does, Pierre Joseph Proudhon or, is there an Emma Goldman quote you can point to that says that anarchists feel this way? Or are you more responding to a general impression you get when speaking with anarchist activists in the street or random anarchists online?
That's a great question. I'll try to be a bit more specific. So you mentioned Joseph Proudhon. For example, he wrote a famous book, Property is Theft, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
more of a pamphlet,
I would,
but yeah.
Sorry, I thought there was a big book, but maybe that was some sort of abridged thing I was looking at.
Anyway, there's books. There's a bunch of essays in it, so it's like he does like 3 essays. But yeah, I would consider it closer to a novella in length, even when you put all 3 together. But yeah, you can continue.
Okay, cool. So I would suggest that the kind of work of Karl Marx or Proudhon, although Marx isn't necessarily an anarchist, I think a lot of anarchists agree to some of his ways of explaining society. I would say that these works and these texts are more of the role of philosophy rather than science. And that these are people who are trying to come up with ways of understanding and thinking about society, which is a good endeavor. But the problem is these things are so complicated that if you make one mistake or a bunch of mistakes in your analysis, you could actually lead to a set of abstractions that aren't actually accurately mapping out reality. So by analogy, and I don't mean to be condescending, I just want to use some analogies of other systems of thought that are examples in which maybe more people could see the folly in. So star signs, for example, a large number of people, although a minority of society, believe that star signs can explain personality traits. So that would be an example of a system of knowledge that seems to be able to map out reality that people believe to, that makes sense to them, that isn't actually a accurate map of reality. Because Brenton, you study martial arts, you do a form of karate, right?
Kyokushin karate, yes.
Yeah, you're probably aware that some forms of martial arts, not all martial arts are created equally. I'm sure you've seen, I don't know if you have, but maybe you or some of the viewers have seen those videos online of where people are using like magical powers to push people around. And the people who go and study this martial arts, they get so invested in the martial art, and they don't actually realize that when they're getting knocked back, they're actually sort of doing it to themselves, and they might actually believe that these martial art practices are actually real.
Yeah, or they're just part of the con. But you see the same thing with faith healing and, a bunch of other different like religious or cult practices. So I see what you're saying there. But I mean, so first off, when you talked about it being philosophy, I agree with you in that it is philosophy and not science. And the thing is that politics is philosophy. Like you might talk to some Marxists, they'll say like, oh, the immortal science of Marx-Leninism, or there may be like some ANCAPs pretending that praxeology is science when it's not. It's pseudoscience. However, the thing is that liberalism is exactly the same way. Every political philosophy is philosophy. It's not science. Now, there is political science that studies politics. And you can go to university and get a political science degree, but you can't really come to scientific conclusions about how our politics should work, because science can only describe the natural world. It can't really give us anything beyond that. So you need the philosophical component. And I mean, yeah, Karl Marx was an absolutely brilliant philosopher. I don't agree with what he had to say, but he was a philosopher, he was an economist, and he's a huge name up there, just like John Locke, just like Adam Smith. These are giants in human history whose work has touched the lives of millions and billions, for better or worse. So, the idea that Marx didn't have credentials, Marx absolutely had credentials, as did Peter Kropotkin's a perfect example. I mean, the man was an actual scientist. He was a zoologist. And he also, was a prince and was royalty and was a activist and argued for anarchism and, wrote The Conquest of Bread. So the people behind the anarchist movement, they absolutely had credentials. I mean, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon was a member of the French Parliament, like with a number of others. Now, random anarchist on the street, maybe not, but I mean, any sufficiently large movement is going to have people who are more on the theoretical end and the thought leaders, and then it may just have, the followers. And so, you need to make a distinction between the philosophy itself and the people who it's coming from, and like just the random passerby who happens to be an adherent, if that makes sense.
I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying, I'll just reiterate it because that helps to make sure that we're on the same page. So you're saying that all political ideologies, liberalism or communism,
liberalism,
anarchism,
communism.
philosophies. All right. So my response to that part would be the follies of people who advocate another belief system doesn't strengthen the claims of any other belief system. It simply demonstrates that they're all just philosophies and abstractions and people's opinions, rather than empirical proven facts.
Sure, but what you're doing there, that's what's called a tu quoque. So if you're arguing that we don't change anything, essentially what you're arguing for is liberalism. So you can argue for liberalism. That's fine. There's a lot to be said for liberalism. The issue is if you argue that we shouldn't change it because anarchist thinkers are unqualified, but somehow liberal thinkers are qualified because one is scientific and one is philosophy, it's just not the case. We're back at square one. We can't go anywhere. And this is one of the big problems with ideology. And I'm not a big fan of Slavoj Žižek. In fact, a lot of the time, I don't think he really has much to say. But one of the things he said that was very profound was the fact that you can't escape ideology. Whenever you think, like, the whole idea is, like, is ideology or glasses, and you think you can take off the glasses and just see the world directly as it is, it's not possible. You pull off the glasses, there's another pair of glasses underneath them.
So can I respond to that a little bit, but also finish the previous thought?
Sure.
So
Sorry.
Just do right. Just elaborating on the qualifications of Peter Kropotkin and Karl Marx and that. I don't have any doubt that these people were very smart, and
they're not just smart, accomplished,
and educated to the degrees that they could have been in that time. But I would say that the methodologies for claims of truth that the philosophy of science use as a way of trying to filter the white noise of reality down to something that's objective and tangible is something they still weren't utilizing, even if they had great thinkers and they were borrowing from other abstractions they knew about.
Okay, but who's doing that today, right now?
Pardon me?
Who's doing that today, right now?
Who's doing that today? Doing what, sorry?
Who is taking a more scientific approach to political philosophy that you can see? Like, is the U.S. government doing that? What specific scientific philosopher, did Thomas Jefferson do something that was more scientific than Karl Marx?
That's a great question. It's a really good question. I'm here not necessarily advocating or defending. So maybe I can respond to that last thing you said about this idea you mentioned about you always have an ideology or something that I think that more radical, sort of more militant street activists in my experience say a lot, which is the idea that if you're not with us, you're against us, because if you're not trying to change the system, you're for the status quo. And that's something that I feel is maybe something that people should be very careful about, because that bleeds into one of the other points I raised in the beginning of the video, where I was talking about the dangers of tribalism and outgrouping people. So
which is a very serious issue.
Yeah. So the in-group has special. The in-group has special knowledge. They believe that they have the answers, and if you don't submit to their, I don't want to, cause people to feel upset, but maybe we can call it dogma. That if you don't submit to that, you're an enemy. And so let's go back to this thing about the idea of we always see through our ideologies and stuff. I think that's a good observation. And there's a lot of, so I'm studying psychology now. I'm in my second year of a degree.
Great.
Cheers. And obviously there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we actually see through our beliefs. So when people get a certain kind of cognitive condition called, I think, agnosia, sorry, I haven't heard it said much as I've read it, where they might have trouble seeing faces or recognizing objects. And because of this this disability or cognitive impairment some people get, it's actually taught science a lot about the ways that our brains are able to recognize cup and object and the way that our brains map it out. And so what we tend to do is we make sense of the world we're seeing through our pre-existing beliefs. So we actually see through our beliefs. That's an accurate sort of idea, which is the idea that, like for the example that I use is that you never hear about an atheist making claims about seeing Charles Darwin's face in burnt toast, but you do hear about Christians seeing Jesus's face in burnt toast.
Yeah.
So our expectations of our belief systems will actually inform the way we filter reality, right? Which is a fascinating thing. And so I would, if I would make a distinction between the philosophies of maybe science versus the philosophies of political, you know, part of what led to science is the idea that, well, you can't, you know, scientists don't actually make the claim that they've proven something. They actually use the word, this has been shown, right?
Yeah.
Where it's that we have evidence to suggest that this is a theory that is happening. And rather than saying this is the proven reality. And this goes back to two thinkers that I want to bring up to contrast it with some political thinkers, which is Socrates and what's his name? The French guy who said, "I think, therefore I am." What's his name again?
Oh, I know.
Descartes.
Yeah, Descartes.
Yeah. So Socrates is one of his famous quotes is, "I'm the smartest man in the land, but I know that I could know nothing." So that actually branched off from Socrates. One of the Hellenic philosophical traditions was cynicism, which is the idea that all we can be sure about is what we don't know. Right. And so Descartes, who, you know, he was in the 1600s and he was one of these super smart people who was like a brilliant mathematician and a brilliant this and that and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and
I'm familiar with Descartes.
Just bringing up people who are watching this video who might not know.
I forgot we had an audience.
Yeah. Just trying to, you know, maybe some of them know this, so bear with me, guys. But so people have probably heard the quote, "I think, therefore I am." So what he was trying to say is you can't actually falsify or disprove the idea that there's not some evil demon tricking your visual perception to think that this is happening or whatever, which is kind of an extension of Plato's caves, right? And but what he observed is all the mind can really do is be in touch with itself. So I know that even if I'm a brain in a vat in a spaceship somewhere in another dimension, at least I know that I'm thinking. Something is thinking here, right? And so obviously we can't walk around in our lives and operate in a way where we're constantly not having some form of a leap of faith, if you will. Obviously, if your mom's about to get hit by a car, you push her out of the way. You don't sit there going, "Is this reality? What's going on?" Right? So when it comes to claims of certainty of anarchism, I would say that you probably agree with me that anarchism doesn't have it's not grounded on any claims of certainty. And so what concerns me partly with anarchism is that, you know, at least a lot of the people online or the people that I used to live with when I was living in squats as an activist, or my former self, is that a danger of being willing to commit violence based on the assumption that you know have the answers is something that scares me and something that reminds me of the kind of fundamentalism and extremism you see in other movements associated with violence, like you know, Islamic terrorism and
yeah.
you know, Nazism and stuff like that. And so that's something that made me maybe really re-question something. So now this idea, to elaborate a bit more into this idea of that, oh, well, if you're not, you know, against liberalism, you're for it. So
hang on, I don't want to interrupt. I don't want to interrupt you here, but I do want to check something.
Yeah,
so I don't know the particular squat you were hanging out at. I would say you should probably be pretty careful around activists in general, particularly ones who are involved in squats. Those are interesting communities and a lot of people there. There's some great people. I've got some terrific friends at C Squat, but also like a lot of these people are people who have been abused. They're people who are having difficulty integrating into society in one way or another. And, having that as your community can definitely be dangerous. Now, what I want to ask you though is like, what kind of violence are you talking about? Are you talking about like violence, like let's go blow up a building like the Weather Underground, or are you talking about violence like let's go break a window? Like what's the specific violence that you heard discussed?
Yeah, sure. All kinds of violence should be killed. Kill the rich people, eat the rich, kill the politicians,
Now,
kill the
yeah,
alt-right, smash the Nazis.
sure. So when they're
Now,
saying this, hang on. So when they're saying this, are they saying this and making actual plans to do it, or are they just saying it to say it?
yeah, yep. So I'll speak to that. So I believe some of them believe that would make the world a better place. I think that so one of the things that made me, leave. I'll give you two stories, right, of what I think is associated with this mindset. Demonization that can lead to violence, and this is the tribalism that I was alluding to. So when it came, so I was involved in organizing Antifa stuff, right? I was actually misquoted by a journalist, but we can talk about that another time.
Yeah.
So when it comes to Antifa, some of the stuff, I saw examples of people who were like, maybe their political views were like center right, or maybe they weren't even that, like maybe they weren't really into politics, but they just sort of by default were center right or whatever. I saw the way that those people could be then labeled alt-right, or which is associated with basically another way of saying someone's a fascist or a violent right-winger.
Yeah, because it was Richard
then,
Spencer. That's like his brand, and he's definitely a fascist.
Yeah, I'm not denying he's not a fascist. So there's the idea that I've seen that the way that terminology can be, people can be labeled as such who maybe aren't that, or maybe, they might have some overlapping beliefs, but maybe they're not like some sort of, I believe in eugenics and so they're just sort of center right people, right? I saw some of those people get labeled that and then be doxxed, stalked, harassed, had death threats. I've had death threats against me. I've been labeled as alt-right. I do not at any point have ever sympathized with alt-right ideologies. And I've seen the way that, I've seen these anarchists, explode at people for simply having an Australian flag because of the flag's association with nationalism, and that people on the far right associate or try to, associate or believe that they
I saw people get mad
nationalism.
about the American flag at Occupy Wall Street. Like, I believe that activists, keep in mind, like a lot of activists are just doing stuff and kind of making it up as they go along, and some people have inappropriate reactions to something. Like, I remember at Occupy Wall Street, on N17 at one point, somebody said that they wanted to sing the national anthem, and so there was a person waving a flag and all the people at Occupy were singing the national anthem, and there was a black guy who like kind of turned and was speaking in my general vicinity, not to anybody in particular, but he's like, look, I don't think you should be waving that flag. That flag enslaved my people. That flag's killing my people. This isn't right, and he had a point. It wasn't what the people were trying to express by singing the national anthem, but people will have different reactions to symbols. Now, it sounds like the specific people you were dealing with were assuming everything is as you've told me, because I don't know, I'm not familiar with, the exact doxing that went on and who did it and who was doxed, but I can believe that they may have called someone a fascist hastily. I mean, hell, I've been called a fascist. Like, it's one of the most ridiculous things on the planet, but there are certain leftists, usually the very online kind, who just want to call everybody a fascist because they get that hit of dopamine in their head from having righteous anger. But similarly, like, I was arguing with a liberal today, and like, they literally argued to murder all rapists. Like, all of them, no matter what, no matter the circumstances of their crime, just kill them. And, I tried to explain to this person why that was inherently unjust and a bad idea, and all. They just didn't want to hear it because, people talk a lot of shit. And so, like, I definitely can see where you would have these worries. And, activists are nuts. Like, there's some great people that I met at Occupy, but there were also some people who were like completely batshit. Some of them were sent to us by the NYPD specifically to be batshit and to mess with us. Some were like actual infiltrators from right-wing organizations trying to start fights and make people look silly. And some of them were people that just wanted to join in, but were out of their minds, and the press, of course, went and zeroed in on them and amplified them because they were interested in smearing Occupy Wall Street and saying, look at this crazy person, don't listen to any of these people, So I think what you're saying, it makes sense, and I think it's valid, and I think it's definitely a concern, but I don't see it being expressed beyond just general activist culture and specific people. Like, these are all definitely pitfalls, but I'm not seeing how that applies to anarchism, like, as a whole, as the political and philosophical tradition stretching back to Pierre-Joseph Proudhon and carrying through to, Catalonia and Rojava and the recovered factories movement in Argentina. So I don't know. Maybe we can talk about this a bit more and move on to the next one. But what I'm hearing here is you ran into some dicks, and I 1000% believe that. I just fear that you may be being a bit hasty to extrapolate that out to an entire political and philosophical tradition.
Well, I actually think there is a causal relationship, I suspect, between the previous point of this discussion about claims of certainty and then ideology. I think, we're talking about dopamine hits and stuff. I think there's a lot of
certainty
anxiety.
Is a drug.
I think there's a lot of anxiety.
I'm saying certainty is a drug. It has the same, being certain about something, feeling certain about something has the same like hit on your brain as like drugs, and people can get addicted to that feeling.
Yeah, it's like a few lines from the Bible is like doing a few lines of cocaine or something. So I think, but I would say that there's a relationship between ideology giving someone the moral justification to enact the dark parts of their psyche, and and this is where maybe I can talk about the next topic, which is scapegoating.
Sure, but real quick, so
yep.
I agree that ideology can do that. But I'm going to challenge you. Show me in anarchist ideology where it says that. Like show me the quote from Emma Goldman or from Peter Kropotkin. Where does it say that? Where does it say I am certain about this and therefore you know that kind of thing? Where do they claim objective truth?
Sure. Well, they make certain statements where they claim, for example, property is theft. He's not saying my opinion is property is theft. He's saying this is it, and we can, if we follow my ideas of politics, we're going to have a better society.
Yeah.
That he was an activist.
That's a good example. Can I explain
I would like to maybe just elaborate a little bit more.
Okay, but let's not. Okay, just don't let me forget that I want to talk about property as theft.
All right, you try to keep a mental note. So when it comes to Emma Goldman, for example, this woman is someone who was involved in bomb plots. She was willing to kill people in the name of, helping the workers and stuff. And it's not clear that necessarily these violence tactics, result in the kind of better world that she had imagined. And I could easily imagine a civil war breaking out and feeling justified in killing the non-believers. I think that the kind of certainty and moral righteousness of anarchism has a similar structure to Nazism. And I know that sounds outrageous, but if I could explain that. So I think as human beings, we have a sort of a moralistic instinct that, say, if me and you were hanging out in a room and a third party walked in and assaulted you, I would feel more justified in assaulting the person who assaulted you, right? Because I would be like, you're hurting Brenton, leave him alone. And it kicks in our empathy drive, and that can also justify anger. So there's actually a relationship in psychology between some forms of empathy and how that relates to anger. You were previously talking about someone who's maybe kill or rape, murder or rapist, to give them the death penalty. It's because they're so empathized with the victims of that they want to kill the baddies, right? So, and in biology, say a mother bear cub, it's her concern for the baby bear cubs with her that will make her rip off your face. So it's actually her in the brain of the bear, the empathy and the caring aspect to protect that can actually drive a lot of homicidal behavior. So when it came to Nazism, they had this conspiracy theory nonsense that the Jews were the ones that caused them all this suffering and economic woes and caused them to lose World War One and all this paranoid fantasy stuff. And it was actually the empathy for the imagined in-group that they believed was attacking them that drove them towards, mass homicidal, mass murder, some of the most horrific crimes ever. And I would suggest that it's actually a very similar structure when it comes to communism, and I'll talk how this relates to anarchism, that actually allowed for some of the insane purgings and public denouncements of that we saw in Maoist China and the Soviet Union. So, for example, innocent people were accused of thought crimes, or maybe people were dissidents and spoke out. But some people who were loyal party members who were just accused of being anti the party, they were labeled as a defender of the evil ruling class and the imperialists that had been oppressing them and caused them all this pain, and that the only way to a better world was to persecute these people. And I think this principle of taking out the judicial process of, okay, let's examine, is this person actually a Nazi? Is this person actually racist? Are these people singing the national anthem actually hating black people and believe in slavery? Or is their version of nationalism the one of the first societies in the world to end slavery was America? And they had a civil war. So for some black people, that could represent anti-slavery,
I'd be surprised, but yeah, I'm sure there's one. No, I get what you're saying here, and your point about empathy is very interesting. Yeah, there are. Your point about empathy is very interesting, and I think it actually does. I don't think it applies to Nazis actually, but I do think it does apply to communists, because famously, and I mean that like authoritarian Marxist communists, famously, Che Guevara said a revolutionary is motivated by great feelings of love, and I do see how that empathy goes into then violence. Now. So that is definitely a pitfall. However, I'm a little worried that what you're doing is you're taking something very, very specific and you're extrapolating it out to times in history that are so much more complicated than what are appearing. For instance, you talk about Maoist China. Maoist China, one of the reasons why there was so much violence that happened in Maoist China and so many purges was not necessarily because of a great amount of class anger that was there, but it was because the Chinese society was extremely regimented around the worship of the father figure. The father figure was the single most important thing in Chinese society, and you did not contradict your father. You gave your father the proper, just to a ridiculous degree. There was so much respect for the father figure that an entire generation of young men felt completely stifled and unable to express themselves and to be themselves. And when Mao came to power with stuff like the Great Leap Forward, what he did was essentially he took this generation of young men that had grown up secretly, silently hating their fathers and wishing they could rebel against them and wishing they could come out from under their shadow, and said, it's okay to kill your father. And boom, the wave of violence hits. So, and that's just one factor among many, many, many. So, there are specific political and social forces within a nation and within a time that can lead to these things, and you don't want to pin it down to just one cause like that. Definitely empathy can have a very dark side. I will grant you that. The purges in the Soviet Union and the USSR, again, the one you should talk to about this is Caleb Maupin, because he knows a lot more about this than I do. But a huge amount of Stalin's paranoia came from Stalin. And if you look at like his early life and how he was raised and like what happened to him coming up, you can see the seeds of that paranoia being planted. But you can also see that like the second the Soviet Union was established, they were attacked by Japan, America, England. Everyone in the world was gunning to take down Stalin and take down the Soviet Union because they were trying to get the genie back in the bottle, and they were so terrified of the fact that the Soviets had killed their king. Most of these other countries, no other country really on that level had killed their king at that point. So the idea is, oh my God, they killed their king. Well, what if our king gets killed? Uh-oh. And then suddenly, you do have a lot of spies and saboteurs, and then Stalin gets stuck in that headspace. Also, the thing with Stalin is, and I'm not defending him, he was a monster, but a lot of the purges that were blamed on him, and him as the sole figure, that is the Russian upper class absolving itself of what was done. That was carried out by people in Russia, and you look at Russia even right now, it's creepy and authoritarian, whether they're capitalist or communist or whatever. This is an aspect of Russian culture. But like what you had happening was that when Stalin was dead, they were like, oh man, we had all these Russians killed. All of these terrible things happened. Quick, blame it on someone. Blame it on the dead guy. He did it. He's the evil one, not us. Leave us alone. Definitely don't look into this anymore. Don't hold any more trials. We're done with trials. And therefore they went on by creating a demonic figure out of Stalin. And Stalin was undoubtedly an evil man, one of the most evil men in human history. But again, this is bigger and more complex than you may have presented it as. Now, I know I've talked for a little bit, but I really got to get back to the property is theft. So property is theft is not an anarchist saying that did not originate with Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. Property is theft is a socialist saying. It's a bumper sticker kind of thing. It was a slogan well before the anarchists. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon actually said three things. Property is theft is the most famous one because it's the most like, ooh, what? How dare you say property is theft? But he said property is theft, property is freedom, and property is impossible. And those were the three things that were published in the same book, in the same novella, the same pamphlet. And there's three essays all meant to go together and to talk about property in different ways. When he's talking about property as theft, what he's talking about is the fact that both property and theft from an objective standpoint are the exact same act. Because property, what property rights are generated, they're not objective. You can't like go in with a scientific thing and like check out check out this iPhone and oh, the water turned purple. That means this iPhone definitely belongs to Brent. No, this iPhone belongs to me because I think it belongs to me. I have it, I control it, and society says it belongs to me. It's a mental thing. And as such, the act of making something property is indistinguishable from the act of stealing something, except for subjective opinion. So if an alien came down here and watched someone steal a house from someone by manipulating the deed, to that alien, that would look no different than someone buying a house from someone by signing a deed. Oh, paper changed hands. now one person is in that house when the other person wasn't in the house. Oh, okay, I get it. So property and theft are mutually dependent. They are two sides of the same coin, and it's really a matter of opinion what one is and what the other is. The second part about it, property is freedom, is that we need property that meets our basic needs to be able to exist, to do the things that we have to do. Um, a great example of just being is like you need a house, you need protection from the environment to continue to live. You need food. You need and this is usually what socialists call personal property. That is the property that leads to someone's freedom. The final one, property is impossible. Again, because property isn't real. It is literally made up by humans and enforced by violence from human institutions like the state. So again, these are philosophical points, and they're very, very subtle philosophical points that get lost because people may only see the slogan and not look deeper into them. It's the same thing as when the ANCAPs are running on about non-aggression principle. The symbol. Well, no, that's actually a bad example. Actually, now that I think about it, because the non-aggression principle is garbage. But do you understand what I'm getting at here?
Yeah. You're talking 2 points. One, the first thing you made about history is that it's very complicated. The causes of things are usually more than one variable. I definitely agree. And then the second point you're talking about is the way that human beings operate as if metaphysical things were real. And that's a very interesting thing to think about. And people have all kinds of opinions and points of view on that. And that might be a great subject to talk about another time.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
I would have loved to. I think we might have to finish this conversation. I'm sure we both have other things we need to do, but it's been really enjoyable.
I'm way behind on my writing.
I did want to talk about the third aspect, which had to do with scapegoating, the difference between maybe ideological and group participation in the social mind versus individuation. Not that that has anything to do with individualism, individuation, where the idea that as we psychologically mature, we get a sense of identity that is robust enough that we don't necessarily become subservient to a tribe, and how that has a relationship where people can confuse their persona with their authentic self, and that the idea of what self is a ongoing process of self-realization, which is often made difficult by things like ego defenses, like rationalization and whatnot, and then how that relates to all the cognitive biases, and how some of these cognitive biases, like the availability bias and stuff, shape and distort our realities, and how that connects to ideology. That's something that I'm very interested in and actually motivated me to study psychology. But perhaps we can talk about all these other things another time.
Definitely, yeah. Let's talk about them another time. This was really interesting. What I will say is, had I been under your circumstances, I may have wanted to make a break from anarchism as well. Like I said, you gotta, like, I spent a lot of time with Occupy Wall Street. I was arrested with the movement, had a cop knee me in the spine and throw me into a motorcycle and by the way, went to court and won, which was great. But the thing is that people need to be very, very careful when they involve themselves with broad political movements. One of the reasons why, for instance, I don't know if you were around when I did this, but like in 2014, 2015, I actually publicly broke with the left. And some of my friends were like, wait, do you not believe this stuff anymore? And I said, no. I'm breaking with the left because I don't want to identify myself with a tribe and have that influence my thinking and feeling. I specifically took steps to avoid getting into a position where my thoughts were compromised by in-group bias. And one of the things that I try to do constantly is to chip away at my own biases as I move forward as a thinker. So, yeah, I mean, this has been a great conversation. I've had a lot of fun. It's good to reconnect with you, honestly.
Yeah, likewise, man. I had fun, and now that we're in a sort of a weird lockdown or whatever, maybe this will be useful content, and it's fun to also express because my girlfriend doesn't want to hear about this shit.
That's
Like
fine.
there's some
Keep talking about it.
circles, so there's circles of friends that some of these thoughts on these topics, their eyes glaze over, and they're like, "Here he goes again." So it's fun to talk to someone who is interested in the subject matter, and I hope that the people who watch this find it interesting, and it'll be interesting to know what they might think in the comment section, and perhaps in the future we can have a more narrowed lens to discuss things on.
Yeah, sounds great. I'll post this on my channel. You post it on yours. If you can, put a link through to mine, because I'm just now getting into YouTube, and honestly, I could use more eyes on my project. So I'd really appreciate that. And
Sure, and
thanks.
just if you can, yeah, send me the links or for
Will
whatever
do.
you want me to put in the description. And all right,
Yeah,
man, have a good one. I'll talk to you later.
absolutely. You too. Peace out.